You also talk about the Quran only movement, which is a really fascinating example in this.
I trashed them for. Sorry.
That's okay. Can you explain what the Quran only tradition is for people who don't know?
This is a modern movement that emerges in South Asia in the late 1800s and a bit in Egypt in the early 1900s, and then actually today it's probably its strongest location is in upper class Pakistani society, and also in Turkey, amongst certain religious thinkers in Turkey, and amongst certain Muslims in the West. And it's very, it's the idea that basically that, you get Islam can be derived from the Quran alone. You don't need the Sunnah of the Prophet. You don't need Hadiths. And so I basically was arguing that this is a very selective. This is an approach that is impossible to apply consistently, and it basically is a means for understanding Islam for people who want to live Islam in a specific cultural and economic context, and that you're not able to actually have a consistent and I think intellectually honest relationship with the Islamic tradition if you follow this approach.
So you will find the hadith are collected, and this is there's the Asr al-Wahi, which is the period of revelation, and this lasts 23 years, and this is when the Quran is being revealed and the hadith. Initially the Prophet said, do not write the hadith with the Quran, because he did not want them to get mixed. So you'll see hadiths where he said that, and now the hadithiyun, these people, the Quraniyun who reject the hadith, they'll use these hadiths, and they say even the Prophet said don't learn the hadith or don't write them down. The Quraniyun are it's an absolutely ridiculous argument, but it's a sign of the ignorance of the time. And the Prophet predicted they would come, because nobody rejected hadith in the history of Islam until very recently. They've always differed about the soundness of the hadith and the soundness of the men transmitting the hadith. That's always been a difference. And there are many fabricated hadith, there are many weak hadith, and then the sahih hadith are less than both the weak and the fabricated. So there are many fabricated hadith, and that was never denied. But this idea that all the Prophet ﷺ brought was the Quran, the Prophet said, do not let me find you reclining on your couches, holding up the Quran, saying, whatever you find in this book, follow it, and if it's not in this book, then don't follow it. He said, and they won't mention my sunnah. And he said, wallahi, I've been given the Quran and its like. So the sunnah is wahi. And the other thing, the religion falls apart without the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. There's no mention of the specific five prayers in the Quran. There's no mention of how to do the Hajj or the Umrah specifically. You won't know how to do the Hajj, the 7 tawaf. You won't know how to do the Sa'i. You won't know what you do at Arafah. You won't know about how to do the Rami. None of those things. Those all come from the hadith. And the mutawatir hadith, which it's kufr to deny them. If you deny ahad hadith, it's not considered kufr, but it's dangerous, because it very well might be revelation and you're denying revelation, but it's not considered kufr unless you deny all of them. But if you find a hadith, like some doctors find the hadith about the fly in al-Bukhari and they say, I don't accept that hadith. That's it's better to say, I have a hard time, but if he said it, I believe it. At least put some kind of conditional statement on there so that you protect yourself from falling into that. But there are people now that reject hadith altogether, and that's basically to reject Islam, because the Prophet ﷺ came with the hadith, and the hadith are true.